asking them how their day is going or what they've been up to, you often will get a blank stare or maybe even just a one-word answer. So first thing I want to ask everybody is I want you to feel free to write in the chat section, who do you want to connect better with? Is it somebody that lives with you? Is it someone that lives alone that doesn't live with you? Is it someone that lives with another family member or lives in a nursing home or a senior living community? So if everybody could write in some comments, that would be great. So A, B, C, or D. Okay, yeah, that's fine if you don't have it on your phone. Okay. So all over, it's all over. We're seeing a lot of D's. A lot of D's, some C's. So it's all over the place. And if it's your client, it might be lives with a family member or lives alone, perhaps. So think about when you are looking to connect with that person, no matter where they are, whether they live with you, whether it's a client that you're visiting in their home, whether it's your mom that lives across town, or even if it's somebody that you see on Zoom or Skype, or if it's somebody that you see, or maybe you just are doing telephone calls with them right now. I want you to be thinking about all of this and how it relates to that person. So we're going to try to cover all of these areas. And so it seems like it's all over the place where everybody has somebody who has dementia. So in Cruising Through Caregiving, I talk about the concept of spending time with somebody who has dementia, and I liken it much to visiting somebody in a foreign country. So in the early stages of any type of dementia, and we're going to use Alzheimer's as an example, because it's the most common form. About 6 million Americans have Alzheimer's disease. But we're going to use the early stages of Alzheimer's, and we're going to liken it to visiting Ireland with no preparation. Now, for those of you who have been to Ireland, you might remember that going there is different. It's certainly a foreign country. People talk with an accent and they drive on the wrong side of the road, and it's greener than it is here. And they probably drink more Guinness than we do here. But for the most part, if you go to Ireland with no preparation ahead of time, you're going to be fine. They speak English for the most part. The signs, you're going to be able to navigate the signs. Body language is similar. And so if you go over with no prep, you're going to be okay. And the same thing, if someone comes from Ireland and they visit the United States with no preparation, they're going to be okay. They're going to be able to navigate. They're going to be able to get around. They're going to have common ground. And this is much like your loved one or your client who is in the early stages of dementia. A lot of the day, they are just like you and I. They are just like you and I, but they have moments where they're different, which is sort of like the Guinness, which is sort of like the, more greenery, which is sort of like the accent. They have moments where they're different from us. So let's talk a little bit about what the early stages look like. More trouble finding words. So if we say to them, Mom, how was your day today? And she might say curtains. And we think, well, that doesn't really make any sense. But she's trying to say, okay. And her brain is just not able to get the right word. Now, I don't want anybody to get nervous because this is very different from when all of us have moments with, it's called tip of the tongue moment, where we have moments where we call our husband by our brother's name, or we call our daughter by our other daughter's name. We all have moments like that, or we say, give me the whatchamacallit, and we mean fork. And if you're having that happen, we do have that happen more as we get older. But if someone truly can't get the word, and this is happening a lot, and you say to them, what did you have for lunch? And they say starfish. And you think, where the heck did that come from? I know that they didn't have a starfish for lunch. This would be something that would be concerning. So something is wrong. There's an awareness that something is not quite right. A lot of people in the early stages know. And so this is much like we know something's wrong. They know something is wrong. Losing items, so maybe your cell phone, maybe your car keys, maybe you put an important piece of jewelry away and you now can't find it, and you can't retrace your steps. Listen, we all lose objects, and that's not something that you want to be overly worried about. We all do it. In fact, right now I can tell you that I'm looking for a key to a drawer, and I know that I'm going to find it, but I'm retracing my steps. Okay, the last time I had this key, where the heck did I put it? But as we get older, this is one of the reasons that we want to put a key hook up, or we want to have a special place in our house where we charge our cell phone. But if we truly can't retrace our steps, we really can't think, okay, was I in the yard? Was I down the street at a neighbor's house? Those are some concerns. The early stages will also involve some issues around activities of daily living. So maybe I come to pick my grandmother up or my mother up that has early stages of Alzheimer's, and she is usually really beautifully dressed if I'm going to pick her up for a party. And she's wearing she would wear a really nice dress or really nice pair of pants and a top with nice jewelry and makeup. And I go to pick her up and it looks like she's wearing clothing that came out of a hamper. Those would be some concerns. So early stages, a lot is similar to us. You're going to have moments with this person that they're like you and I, and you're going to ask that person, what did you have for lunch? And they're going to say, I had grilled cheese. And then you're going to have times where you ask them what they had for lunch and they're going to say pencil. So in the mid stages of dementia, I liken that to visiting Italy. And so if you go to a rural area of Italy, like Tuscany, you're going to find, if you've been there, that there's not a lot of people who speak English. There are some, but for the most part, most people don't speak a whole lot of English in the rural areas. And listen, Italy, there's a lot that's familiar. The food looks familiar. Food is, everyone's really familiar with Italian food in the United States. The food looks familiar. If you've taken a Romance language in high school, or even, I know a lot of students take it in middle school or even elementary school now, you took Spanish, you took French. If you go to the rural area of Italy and you don't know Italian, you're still going to be able to navigate because you are going to be able to pick up on some of the words. Body language can be similar. If we gesture that we would like the check or we would like a drink, that's going to be something that we can communicate through body language. But again, with that language barrier, it's going to be a lot tougher. And so what a lot of people would recommend, if you're going to a country where you don't speak the language, is that you read the Rick Steves books, that you download on your iPhone the Italian to English app, that you read a little bit more about some basic words and basic gestures that are going to get you around. So you're going to be able to communicate better with the folks in Italy. And so this is much like being around somebody or visiting or spending time with someone who's in the mid stage of a dementia diagnosis. And that person's going to have moments where they are like us, but they're also going to have moments where they're very unfamiliar. So in the middle, we see more wandering, walking outside of their house in the middle of the night. And I actually know somebody several years ago on the 4th of July who left their home and wasn't found for 2 days in the sweltering heat. And this is somebody whose spouse was home. They just weren't in the same room with their loved one. This person wandered away and was very dehydrated, very lost for a couple of days. Very scary situation. More delusions, more hallucinations. And so might believe that you're stealing from them, might believe that you're cheating on them, might believe that you're trying to poison them. And in this stage, they have a harder time understanding us. We have a harder time understanding them. And then we see even more challenges with activities of daily living. So if you go to pick up your mother or your loved one who has Alzheimer's disease to go to a party and they're in the mid stages, they might come to the door and buttons are not buttoned properly, or they have the wrong buttons, or the zippers aren't zipped up, or they have two different shoes on, or maybe they didn't comb their hair and their makeup is smeared. So this is much like the person's still gonna seem somewhat familiar. There's gonna be familiar, but it's gonna be harder to navigate if we don't understand what that person is experiencing and going through. So I liken the middle stages to Italy. The late stages of Alzheimer's, I liken to going to a country like Yemen, which is very undeveloped. It's a Middle Eastern country where they speak Arabic. The laws are very different about what you wear, about your body language, about different activities that you're permitted to engage in. And so if you went to Yemen with no preparation, you would be in big trouble, because you could make a major mistake that could harm yourself, could potentially harm others. And communicating is going to be next to impossible, because gesturing could sometimes even offend somebody. Facial expressions, the clothing that you're wearing or not wearing could potentially get you into some sort of trouble. So if you were going to go visit Yemen, it's something that has to be so carefully planned. And so with somebody who has the late stages of Alzheimer's, this is the same idea. If you don't want to be interacting and visiting with somebody who has late stages of Alzheimer's unless you understand a little bit more about them, because there's going to be very little that's still familiar about that person. That person is probably not going to be able to do any of their activities of daily living. I might go to pick up that person in the late stages of Alzheimer's for the party. And it's not like the early stages where I go to pick mom up and her clothing looked like they came out of the hamper. It might not be the mid stages where I go to pick mom up and she doesn't have the buttons and zippers properly done. And then she has her makeup all smeared and different shoes on. No, she wouldn't be able to even get dressed. She wouldn't be able maybe to get out of bed to get dressed and even figure out how to put on a top or a dress. And she would need help with that. That wouldn't even be possible. There's increasing dependence on you or professionals, and almost no ability to use words, very little vocabulary left anymore. And a lot of people who are in the late stages of Alzheimer's or other types of dementia will use sounds. And so when my grandmother-in-law, my husband's grandmother, was dying, she died of cancer. She, up until the last couple of days, was able to tell us exactly what she wanted. And when she would come in, when I go in the room, I'd say, "What do you feel like eating?" And she would say, "I feel like a donut," or "I feel like some juice." And the last few days, the last week, she really wasn't communicating anymore. But we were so fortunate, because up until the last few days or week, she could tell us if she was hot, if she was tired, if she didn't want any company anymore. Same thing with my grandfather when he was dying of cancer. I remember there was a day we were all in the hospital, way too many of us in the room with him. And he just said, "Everybody get the hell out of the room. I want some peace and quiet." And we all kind of laughed, because my grandfather just didn't say stuff like that. He was a very, very sweet, gentlemanly guy. But he was able to tell us what he needed. And someone with Alzheimer's in the late stages, and perhaps even sometimes for years, can't speak to you and tell you what they need. If they're hot, they're going to throw a blanket off of the bed. If they don't want company, they're going to push your hands away. If they're in pain, they might scream. And so I liken the late stages very much to visiting a country like Yemen. You've got to understand what you're dealing with, or you're going to really have challenges, you're going to have trouble, and it's going to be so unpleasant for you, and it's going to be so unpleasant for that person that you're caring for. So the person, and I know some of you are on, it's not your loved one, it's clients that you work with, but if you would share, where do you think your person is, your person with dementia? Are they A, early stages, B, mid, or C, more late stages? Let's see what we got in here. Okay. We're all over the place. Okay. Mostly A's and B's, it looks like. Mostly A's and B's. Okay. So for those of you who are C's, then this is probably even more important to be remembering that we don't want to be asking them how their day was, that we don't want to be asking as many questions. And in fact, we want to be less and less verbal as the disease progresses. So those of you who are helping somebody who is in early stages or mid stages, I feel that this is going to be so helpful for you for a very long time, because what you want to get used to is that the more time that goes by, the less verbal that you probably want to be, and the less verbal that your loved one or your client is likely going to be. Now, for a lot of us, that is not a natural inclination. A lot of us like to talk. And especially if you're taking care of somebody, maybe it's your sister, maybe it's your sister who has dementia, then you always enjoyed her advice. And you always talked about your kids together and what was going on with your family, and talked about your favorite shows. And now suddenly you can't do that. And it's very hard. And it's hard to get out of that habit that you want to confide in your sister. You want to ask her opinion on topics that are important to you. And in the early stages, you're probably going to be able to do that for a while. But you've got to become very aware that as time goes by, it's going to probably be less satisfying to have a conversation with her. And it's probably going to be very difficult and challenging for her to respond to you in the way that you want her to. So it looks like we have okay. If anybody has a comment or question, or anybody has anything they want to ask at this point, feel free to write in. So what words would you use? And I want you to just pick, it says choose all that apply, but we're not doing the poll. I want you to pick 2 words. What are 2 words that you want to write into the chat section that you want to tell us when you spend time with your loved one? There are 5 negative words and there are 5 positive words. So you can pick whatever words work for you, but pick 2 and write them in the chat section. So I'm seeing sad and frustrated, D and E, so exhausted and frustrated, stressful and sad, frustrating and enjoyable, okay. D and E, so stressful and exhausted, L and D, okay. G and D, enjoyable and stressful, okay. So if you are at the point where, if you look at all 10 words, and there's no positive words that you can identify right now. So if you're not having fun, if you're not relaxed around them, if you're not, somebody's writing in grateful, which is wonderful. If you're not feeling joyful or having an enjoyable time, it's likely that you are probably more needing to adapt your approach than somebody that's saying, yeah, I'm still having some positive words associated with the time I spend with my loved one. Somebody just wrote in, I wonder about the possibility that, like a person in a coma, the person may still benefit and understand being talked to. Yes, I agree with that. I think talking to him or her, yes, for sure. But I think you want to rely on verbal communication less. And I'm going to get into exactly what I mean by that. But I wanted to just let everybody know that if you're finding more often that you're having more negative feelings about the time you spend with that person, then it really is likely that you need to pull back your approach, that you need to adapt and you need to adjust.
Jen, we had a question that you might be covering, but let me read it out to you. It said, if a person is in the late stages of dementia and is rarely able to express themselves verbally, are they able to understand what we say to them now and then? And is it worth just telling them stories?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. So listen, here's the thing that I always want everyone to think about. I'm never, and I hopefully no professional is ever going to tell you you can never do something. So if you are telling your loved one stories, or you're telling your client stories, maybe you're talking about something that happened to you over the weekend and they seem engaged, then go for it. Keep it up. Or if they're smiling, or if they seem like they're nodding along, when I think you need to course correct is when they seem frustrated, they seem angry, they seem disinterested. So, and you'll see this is, and again, the person with dementia is a grown up, but in a lot of ways, their communication will become much like a small child. They'll walk away from you if they're still ambulatory. They'll push you away. They might turn their head. So you want to look at them for cues, or their eyes might glaze over. And that's them giving you signals that they don't want to hear about it, or they don't want to talk so much, or maybe that it's just not engaging to them. So for most of us, and again, if I want to just be really clear, if you feel like your loved one is engaged and in benefit from you talking, I believe that people with dementia understand a good amount, but, and we don't 100% know for sure at any given time, but I think that the big thing is watch his or her facial expressions, watch his or her body language, because remember, it's like my grandmother-in-law who threw the blanket when she was hot. Who didn't have to throw the blanket when she was hot. She could say, hey, I'm hot. I don't want this blanket anymore. Someone with dementia that's going to be how they communicate with you. So if they're pushing your hand away, if they turn their head, if they walk out of the room, those are signals that you're talking probably too much. A lot of us spend too much time talking. And so I'm not saying that you can't talk. I'm not saying that it's bad, but in a lot of cases, we are talking too much. And I think what that means is we need to be looking at what can we do besides talk? We're relying on talking verbally. And that's what I want to encourage everybody to think about. What can you do? What can you do to course correct so you're not talking as much? In order to illustrate this point, I want to share with you a story about my husband and his friend Bill. My husband's friend Bill had recently broken up with his girlfriend. And Sean and Bill go out and they watch a game and they are drinking beer. And Sean comes home and I say to him, how's Bill doing? He's like, oh, fine. And I said, I said, well, how's he feeling about the breakup? Is he okay? He's like, we didn't talk about it. And I said, well, what do you mean you didn't talk about it? He says, we didn't talk about it. It didn't come up. I said, what do you mean it didn't come up? He says, what were you guys doing? And he says, we were watching the game and drinking beer. And I write about this concept in Cruising Through Caregiving. The idea that, now listen, I know that not every man is like this, but in this case, and some men, a lot of men that I know are like this, that they can hang out with each other and they don't have to have deep conversations in order to be there for each other, connect with each other. They golf. They might listen to a band. They might watch a game. They might go out on the boat and fish. They might not necessarily need to have a deep conversation. Whereas I find a lot of times, at least for myself and my girlfriends, when we want to connect with each other, we talk. And we're talking about everything, like what's going on in our work lives, what's going on in our personal lives, what are our dreams, what are our fears. And if I went out with a girlfriend who just had broken up with her boyfriend, I cannot imagine that her breakup wouldn't come up in conversation. But the point that I'm trying to make to you all is that when you're with somebody who has dementia, especially past the mid stages, I want you to think about trying to be like two dudes watching a football game or two guys just listening to a band that they both like. Think about what kind of activity can you do that doesn't rely on a deep conversation. Now, again, I want to go back. If you're having conversations with your loved one or your client and it's going well, that's great. Keep it up. If you are reminiscing, you're looking at old photographs, you're talking about the last holiday that you all spent together, that's awesome. If it works, it works. But what we see, and again, for especially for people who visit a loved one that they don't see every day, or maybe don't see more than a couple times a month or a year even, is that they'll say, oh, how are they treating you in here, mom? Or what did you do today? Or how's your day been? And this is kind of a non-starter for a lot of people with dementia. They don't really know how to respond to that. And sometimes if they respond in an inappropriate way, maybe you ask them, how was your day? And they say, birthday. And you say, no, mom, it's not your birthday. It can lead to that person becoming really upset because they are trying to communicate with you and it's not getting through. The aphasia is impacting them that they can't get the word out that they want, and it can lead to frustration. So if conversation is working well for you and your person with dementia, great. But if it stops working, I want you to be thinking about activities that you can do that don't involve a whole lot of verbal activity. So using your senses, dancing. So dancing, music, it's all about the senses. It's touch, it's listening, it's the rhythm. You can feel the rhythm sometimes if the music has bass. So using your senses, and for people who have dementia, often their senses are very sensitive. And so they'll be very happy. You might notice this, if that you're visiting your loved one or you visit your client, they grab your hand or they want to touch you. And this is a way that person is connecting right now. Getting comfortable with the quiet. And I particularly want to speak to those of you who are visiting somebody who you don't live with or who is in a nursing home or an assisted living. I think a lot of families and even professionals sometimes feel that they have to put on a show almost for that person with dementia. They have to entertain them. And I know, and I'm going to just use the example of when I have company at my house. I always want to make sure people are having fun and they're doing what they want. And do you need anything? Do you want a drink? And sometimes, especially we live on Kent Island, and you can probably imagine we have a boat, we have lots of company, we have a big house, not a big house, but a big area for guests. And sometimes the guests just want to sit and veg out and they want to watch TV, or we're all sitting in the living room and some Seinfeld comes on and we all start watching that, and they don't need to be entertained. And I think it's similar when we go to visit someone who has dementia. I think for a lot of us, especially if we're not totally understanding their disease and what's going on with them, we feel like we have to overcompensate and we feel like we have to be on. And I'm telling you that sometimes less is more. That sitting with that person and holding their hands, giving them a manicure, putting on some music, maybe going for a walk. And yeah, this is nothing wrong with talking, but you don't have to be talking the entire time. It is good to get comfortable with the quiet. I've been a psychotherapist in my career, and that's one of the first things that they teach you when you become a counselor is you've got to become comfortable with the quiet. Because sometimes in the quiet, that is when somebody is thinking and somebody is getting ready to share. And sometimes I think that translates very well to somebody with dementia, because people who have dementia, as the disease progresses, following conversation becomes more difficult, and figuring out the right responses. Think about how fast many of us talk and how quickly we respond to each other. And a lot of us are formulating our answers and our thoughts and our feedback before somebody even finishes. It takes somebody with dementia a lot of mental energy, especially when they're in the mid stages and beyond, to be able to even engage, to be able to give a response. So try to get comfortable with the quiet. It's often about us. It's not always about them. They oftentimes are going to be totally satisfied talking for a little bit and then watching an old movie with you. And then maybe you rub their back, and then maybe you talk a little bit more. And then maybe you take a little walk, and then maybe you talk a little bit more. We are the ones, more so than the person with dementia, I believe, that often struggle with that quiet. So feel free to write in with any comments or any questions. Is anybody found that they have gotten more comfortable with being quiet or being more engaging without as much words and conversation? I'd love to hear from anybody who might like to jump in. And if we were in person, I would be, I'm going to give a little bit more quiet, but if we were in person, I'd be able to read your body language and see somebody's ready to say something. But I'm going to give it a few moments. Okay, we got a couple people writing in. Okay, so I am going to take a look. Okay. It's a great practice just being in the moment. Thank you, Ellie. My mother is the opposite, Chrissy says, of what you described. She doesn't stop talking. And Chrissy, that's great. Now, and when I say that's great, I know that might be challenging sometimes, because sometimes folks are saying, okay, I'd like to have a little bit of quiet, but it might change at some point. So Mom and I have always talked a lot. Quiet still isn't really a thing. That's great. Ellie's saying holding hands and smiling at each other. Chrissy's saying the same conversation over and over. So Chrissy, I'm going to address that in a minute, that same conversation over and over. Angie's saying Mom's religious, so playing prayers is great and just listening. See, that's what I love. That is fantastic. You are really in tune with what your mom likes, what she needs, and that's fantastic. Carol says Mom is in a memory care community, won't let her leave. I can't come in. We sit outside 6 feet apart, can't answer questions. I get 30 minutes with her, so I have to talk the whole time. I'm so sorry you're going through that, Carol. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't want to pronounce this person's name wrong, but somebody was saying watching Mass with the clients. As long as that's something that they like to do, that's a great idea. Obviously, you want to, make sure that it kind of goes back to like music or movies, old movies. Having an old movie on with somebody is great, but it's got to be a movie that they like, that's in their long-term memory, or music. And sometimes people will say, well, I'm going to try new music with my loved one, and that's great, but you can never ever go wrong with using music or playing music that's in that person's long-term memory. And if it's religious music, if it's holiday music, if it's patriotic music, or if it's Motown or the standards. So Andrea says combination of talking, dancing, watching TV, music, try to follow her lead. I love that. Okay, Carol, I love this. Carol, this is great. You're taking your dog next time. I really like that. That is what I'm talking about, because she can get some of that tactile stimulation. Liz is saying chair yoga exercises on YouTube. That's great. Carol, I'm really sorry about that. I can't imagine with the vaccine and that you can't be able, I'm most communities now seem like, at least the ones that I've been working with, are been much more liberal about visitation. I'm so sorry you're going through that. But I think you're right that having the dog come is a really, really great way to connect with that person. Pets and children are other ways that and I don't want to say that they're conversation pieces, but they don't expect anything from the person with dementia. But Kimberly Williams Paisley wrote a book called Where the Light Gets In. And I think it's a really terrific book. And she writes about when her mom was diagnosed with a form of frontotemporal dementia. She was the one sitting on the floor with the kids playing, and the kids didn't care that she didn't remember everything perfectly, but they enjoyed playing with her. And so children and pets, they do not judge, they don't have expectations. I think for people who have dementia, they sometimes can see that we maybe are disappointed in the way they're reacting or the way that they're responding. And so having the dog come is wonderful. Barbara said client likes back rubs, holding hands. She's past being able to be part of a conversation and can only put a few words together, but she really doesn't respond to many of the activities yet. As somebody gets more into the later stages, or what I call the Yemen, I think that they have more challenges with group activities, that these smaller activities can be better, these more individualized one-on-one. So let's talk a little bit more. So what do we do instead? Garden. So in terms of can somebody do something? There are people who can't have a long conversation, but they can garden, or they can dance, or they can sing. They're not going to have a long conversation with you, but they can dance, or they can sing, or they can garden. That they enjoy pets. So Carol, I really, and again, it's for everybody out there, of course, as long as they don't have any allergies, listening to the radio. This is another activity for a lot of folks, is in the long-term memory. So people, especially over 70, 75, they listened to baseball games on the radio. They were used to listening to their stories, their soap operas on the radio. So listening, sometimes just having the radio on in the background can be very soothing. So for that person that wrote in, and I apologize, I got out of the chat, and I'm trying to think of who it was. I apologize. The person that said that their loved one doesn't stop talking. What I would suggest to you is that repeating and they don't stop talking, a lot of that is very much related to boredom. And if we start to engage them in other activities, get them involved in something, bring a pet around, borrow a neighbor's cat or dog, put on the radio, put on music, a lot of times that is going to be something that's going to engage them and get them off of that topic that you're probably ready to be done with, and take a little break from talking about that whatever is on your loved one's mind. The fact that it's their wedding day, maybe. So Lisa says jigsaw puzzles, and they make them at all skill level. That's terrific. And do them together with music on, listening to a book. I love that, Joanne. So in terms, old movies are terrific. What are the movies that he or she liked when they were younger? And now it's never, you can always try a new movie. That's never a bad idea, or a new television show. I'm never going to say don't do that. But what I will say is, I know for me, and I don't know about you all, and I'm curious, you feel free to write in. Don't you find it soothing to watch one of your favorite movies over and over again? My husband and I, we watch Casablanca like 2 or 3 times a year, and it's so soothing. It's just such a good feeling to just the suspense, and we look forward to certain scenes. and there's a bunch of movies. There's a bunch of movies. The Ref with Dennis Leary is another one. We've got a whole bunch of movies that we just enjoy. But I can only imagine that if it's soothing when your brain is working properly, I can only imagine that having that long-term memory, knowing that it's familiar characters, familiar scenes, that it would be very, very soothing for somebody. And try to think about what movies did they like. And this is an easy one now with all the streaming services, but if you don't have that, you can rent pretty much anything you want at the library. Aromatherapy. So as long as your loved one doesn't have allergies, trying out different scents, baking, utilizing scented candles and being very careful about the flames and making sure that it's safe with your loved one. But trying different scents and stimulating their olfactory nerves. Actually, nerves is not the correct word. Their olfactory senses can be really stimulating. And then what does this remind you of? Some people brought up doing a massage, which is very, very soothing and therapeutic. And again, I know that for some of you as family members, we're not saying that you give them a deep tissue back rub. We're talking about maybe rubbing their hand or rubbing their arm. And that kind of touch, that tactile stimulation is very, very good for people to feel connected. Because again, think about it, and I know the person that you care about who has dementia, he or she is an adult, they are a grown-up, they're not a child. But a lot of the way that they're getting their needs met now, because of the verbal going downhill, a child is building up their verbal skills. A person with dementias is decreasing day by day by day. So that touch, that hand holding, that putting your hands on their back can be very, very soothing. Reading aloud, and some of you brought up doing books on tape. For massage, and I want to talk to people who are in relationships, married couples or long-term relationships, there's a great book by Dr. Ruth called Dr. Ruth's Guide to Alzheimer's Care. Dr. Ruth Westheimer and Pierre LaHue wrote this book, and it talks about sexuality and dementia. And I know that this can be a very, no pun intended, touchy subject, because you got to be concerned about consent, but especially if you're in a long-term relationship, this might be the way that you are still able to connect. Now, I'm obviously not in the late stages when that person is really not going to be very mobile, but in the early and mid stages, sometimes that can be kissing and laying together in bed, even if you're not engaging in anything sexual, truly sexual, but talk to the doctor, talk to people in your support group about that, or your therapist about that if you're not sure. But try to read your loved one's cues. And again, for those of you who have intimate relationships with the person who has dementia. Oh, Barbara, this is great. Your client loves to have facial moisturizer applied and lip gloss, hand lotion. Yes, excellent, excellent, excellent. And putting lotion on arms and hands, those are such great ideas, and you get that tactile stimulation. Bringing a baby, we talked about, and listen, I know that things are weird right now still. Maybe if the person can't hold the baby for, everybody's got their comfort level of what they feel is okay right now, but bringing a baby for them to wave to, babies for a lot of people, or little children, even being able to watch little kids play, going to the park, watching children play, even at a distance, can be really, really soothing for somebody who has dementia. Getting some kind of change of scenery. When a lot of people focus on just repeating and repeating and repeating, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but a lot of it has to do with understimulation, that they're always in the same place, that there's nothing new being offered to their environment. Colleen says, one true joy, her first great grandchild. Take mom to see her once a week. Beautiful. I love that, Colleen. Excellent. And I'll tell you what, it really is so therapeutic for people. And again, I do, and I don't have evidence of this, but when you look at facial expressions of persons who have dementia, when they feel frustrated or they feel like they're disappointing somebody who's asking them to do something or asking them a question, when there's an animal, when there's a child around, that child, that animal has no expectations. There's no judgment. And I think deep down, the person with dementia recognizes and senses that. Beverly says, took mom for a long drive to see the spring flowers. Or go to the waterfront, take a walk at the water, or take a walk at your local beach. These are, and listen, routine is important with Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. It is. But having activity is too. And I'm telling you that your loved one is going to benefit when they are stimulated in a way that they can tolerate. And for a lot of people, too much conversation is going to be difficult. So, let's see, we got another comment in here. Oh, nice. Send your sister short videos of grandchildren, which she watches over and over again. Liz, that's wonderful. Now remember, so for some people that works great. For others, the TV or screens, I know during the pandemic, a lot of people, they want to see their loved one on Zoom. They want to see their loved one on Skype. And for some people that works beautifully. And for videos of the grandchildren or the nieces and nephews, that's great. But remember that some people, if they see a video, or some people don't respond well to TV, they think there's people actually in the room with them. So just be mindful of that. But if it's working, great. Just keep it up. So the moral of the story is, if it's working, keep it up. If it's not, try some of these other strategies. And there's no shortage of ways you can try to connect with your loved one that don't involve talking. I know it's an adjustment for a lot of us. I know it is. And especially if you were accustomed to having deep, wonderful, meaningful conversations with this person. And for those of you who still have it, who are still able to have it with that person, that's amazing. Enjoy it and ask them all the questions that you want to ask them while you can. Write down the memories. That said, pull back and course correct. If they become agitated, if they have a moment where they don't know the answer or they start to drift, give them time, give them a break. Taking a walk, exercising, stretching. Just because somebody maybe can't have a long conversation does not mean that they can't exercise or walk or do yoga. Just observing, like we had somebody write in a few moments ago about just going out and looking at the beautiful flowers, or looking at the water, or looking at the birds outside, reminiscing, looking at old photographs, home movies. And sometimes just talking about old memories and not asking your loved one questions if he or she is unable to participate, and just watching them smile, just watching them enjoy the conversation. Remember, all of this, for those of you who are having great conversations with your loved one right now, or your client right now, enjoy it, keep it going. But know at some point there will probably be the need to course correct, because verbal skills, verbal abilities do diminish as the disease progresses. And when that happens, for a lot of us, it's so, so important to be looking at what other resources do we need. Do you need to bring a home care aide into the home to help? Because maybe you're getting really frustrated. Do you need adult day? Do you need to be exploring senior living or a nursing home? But there's never just one way to be a good dementia caregiver. There are a lot of ways to do it. And there's always the opportunity to course correct. And that's why the area agency is here for you. Join the support groups. Keep coming back to these programs. So a question that we have is, mom is struggling with word finding. If she can't find the right word, should I help her or wait? I suggest you try one and see what she does. So if you give her, mom, do you mean water? Do you mean orange juice? And if she seems like, yes, orange juice would be great, wonderful. If she seems annoyed with you, stop doing it, pull back. Just say, oh, I'm sorry. And I think a big part of good dementia communication is learning to sometimes apologize even when you don't do anything wrong. Oh, I'm sorry about that. You know what? Let me let you tell me when you're ready. Sometimes it's not even about giving her the word. It might even be handing her the pen that she was trying to get the word out of the fork, or the spoon that she was trying to get the word out for. But all of this is trial and error. And what works today may not work next week. And so that's why you always want to be open to the possibility of course correcting. So I want to wrap up by saying, for those of you who are struggling connecting, think about it. Are you asking questions that are stressing the person with dementia out? You can keep asking questions, but if they're not answering, or if they seem bored or they seem disengaged, you have the opportunity to course correct. Think about integrating some activity. They can be short. They can be 5 minutes of listening to the radio, 5 minutes of stretching, 10 minutes of taking a walk. The more that your loved one or your client is engaged, the less likely you are to have challenging behaviors. So if it's not working, stop asking how their day was so you can connect more meaningful with that person. I want to leave the chat box open for comments and questions, and I'm going to put the website in here if you would like a copy of the first chapter of Cruising Through Caregiving and all the worksheets. You can get them for free if you go to cruisingthroughcaregiving.com. But I'm going to keep it open for comments and questions. We have a few more minutes. And if Mary would like to add anything. Uh-oh, Mary's muted again.
It helps if I unmute, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you had a question here saying that dad sleeps a lot. How much is too much? Do you have anything insightful about this?
Dad sleeps too much. Okay, so I think talking to the doctor is a good idea. Asking the doctor about it, maybe it might be medications. It might be that there's depression. There could be so many reasons why that's happening, but and definitely talk to your doc. But I would also ask you, is your dad engaged in any activity besides sitting on the couch and watching TV? And I don't mean that as a criticism. What I mean by that is, so often when somebody's sleeping too much, it's because they're bored. Now, it could be medicine. It could be truly depression. There could be a lot of reasons why this is happening. But what I would do is try to integrate some activity into dad's day every day. I once worked with a couple many years ago where the husband had dementia, and the wife, every day they would get up, they would have breakfast, they would get cleaned up, and then they would go somewhere in the late morning or the early afternoon, whether they walked around Target, whether they met somebody for lunch, whether they went to the park, whether they went to the library, whether they went to a movie. They did something every day in the late morning, early afternoon, and then they came back, they took a little rest, had dinner, maybe watched a movie, maybe took another walk. But there was a routine, but there was some kind of stimulation happening every day. And I think that when somebody's sleeping a lot, it's often because they're not stimulated enough. And again, I'm not saying that as a criticism, because a lot of us just don't know, or maybe you don't have the time, you're busy, maybe you're working, but that would be, I would talk to the doctor, but I would also consider seeing, is there more that your loved one could do? And are they sleeping too, are they sort of just laying on the couch and watching TV? My husband and I went to see my mom today. She thought we were her mother and father. Should we correct her? I would say no. I would say it's really hard to not correct her. But listen, in the early stages, I think in the really early stages, you might try, Mom, hey, Mom, it's me, it's Linda, and see how she responds. And she might say, oh, yes, Linda. But she might not. She might become upset. She might say, you're my mother. Or she might feel bad that she made a mistake. So if you're going to try to correct her, which especially if it's past mid stage, I usually would say no, try not to, just go with what she believes. But if you're going to correct her, only do it one time and then just fall in line with what she believes or what she's thinking.
I had a couple more questions in the chat, Jen.
Sure.
My mother calls me 5 times a day asking about her mother who passed 23 years ago. I read that you should not correct them when they're confused, but she's usually asking me specific questions like, what is her phone number? Should she come live with me? How should I handle these questions?
It's tough, Chrissy. I think, again, I would say you can tell her the phone number. I mean, what her phone number, the phone number used to be, and you can tell her, but I think that that's often going to lead her to keep trying the phone number and of course getting whoever lives there now. I think, I'm sorry, and it says, should she come live with me? I'm not sure if she's asking you that or you're asking me if she should come live with you, but I write a whole chapter in Cruising Through Caregiving about that. But how should, I would try to talk about her, her mother, reminisce about her mother. I also, like sort of redirecting, like trying to have a conversation about your grandmother, her mother. And I know Mom is on your mind. I would be really careful about saying she passed away 23 years ago, because that could become very upsetting for your mom, and that having that grief response, that acute grief response, like she's hearing it for the first time. But oh gosh, she wants you to have her mother come live with you. You might say what like almost like a little bit of a therapeutic fib. Mom, I can think about it. I could think about that. And it's not totally on, I mean, it's sort of like that fiblet, but if that, I think she's got her mother on her mind. The other question that I would ask, and I know that this is a little bit pivoting from what your original question is, Chrissy, but what is your mom doing all day that she keeps calling you? To me, that's a question for, is she engaged in any activity that's keeping her stimulated? Does she need adult day? Does she need an aide to be taking her for some walks? Does she need somebody to be putting on music that she enjoys? A lot of times when someone's fixated on a topic or has that repetitive behavior, we can divert it if we get that person engaged in something that they enjoy. So I know that it's not always easy, but it might be something that you want to look into. And if she's living alone, I'm very concerned about that right now, because if she's calling you 5 times a day and she believes that her mother passed, that concerns me very much. I would hope that she is not by herself, because to me, she would be somebody that I'd worry about walking out of the house and not knowing how to get back. So what should you do when, and this is going to be the last question we're going to answer because we're right at time. What should I do if the person, if they want to do an activity and they say no, but I sense that they're bored? So, so if I was in a room with you all, I would say, all right, everybody, we're going to stand up. And most of the time you're going to stand up and your brain works properly, right? So, but think about it. When I give you that cue and I put my arms up and I say, we're going to stand up, a lot of you are going to do it. Some of you might say, I'm not going to do it, but a lot of you are going to do it. If you say, we're going to go take a walk, and you take that person's hand, oh, I really need your help in the kitchen, we're going to go bake, you're probably going to get a lot less resistance. You want to make more declarative statements and ask less questions. And again, I'm going to say it again, that your loved one or your person that you take care of who has dementia, they're not a kid, they're not a child, but in some ways we have to talk to them in a little bit of a way like we would talk to a developing child, because if we want a child to come and go, use the restroom, we're going to say, oh, it's time to use the restroom. And it might be the same thing with your loved one, that we want to, we're doing it for their own good, to get them stimulated. And using a declarative sentence is often going to be much more, get you the result that you want, rather than asking questions. And if they don't like it, they still have a right to say no. If they get to the kitchen with you and you got the cookie dough out and you're ready to bake and they don't want to do it, they can walk away. We're not saying you have to force them to do anything, or you put on the movie for them and they walk out of the room and they don't like it. We're not saying force them, but try a declarative approach rather than a question.
Well, Jen, thank you so much. I think this was so helpful tonight. I want to remind the folks that need a certificate of attendance to give me an email tomorrow. You have my email from the reminder that was sent to you. Give me an email with your phone number and your full name so that I can match you up to the Zoom attendee sheet. Just also remind folks that we still have some openings, I think for the August, I think we're full in July, but we have openings for our August Dementia Live workshop. It's still virtual. We'll still be doing it virtually in August. And if you haven't I attended before, I really strongly suggest that you do, because you're going to get a little taste from your loved one's point of view of all the things that Jen was talking about tonight. So if you're interested, give me an email or a call in the next few days, because they are filling up fast. Like I said, we added a couple extra ones this summer, and I think we're now into August getting people registered. So again, thank you all for coming, and we'll get the presentation, the PowerPoint, to you tomorrow. And Jen, it was just, again, it was great. And I look forward to seeing you again in September.
Thank you, everybody. Good night. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the summer. I hope to see everybody in September. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Good night.